listed a lot of challenges here because challenges are often an opportunity for change, for improvement. One of the things that we learned was, as of course, was these weak systems of accountability from community to national level. This is a chronic problem. Challenges of accountability. One of the other things that we found while we were doing this, that outside of SUVA, I know how an EOC should run and the act and all of that, but outside of SUVA, which is the hub, the people in government, even CSOs, communities, they don't know, those established processes for responding to such humanitarian events. We found that out in the north, particularly during GCS. There was, you could see that, the running of EOCs, there were people coming in, the way it was being coordinated within the EOCs and even outside, yes, people were being deployed outside to the various communities that are affected. Initial dam adjustment, and then when it's going to happen. Someone came here, delivered this year, but we haven't been. So there was a lot of confusion on the ground. So the stuff that we know here in SUVA, we shouldn't take it for granted that that same approach will be applied in various divisions or in various districts. Because the challenges that responders encountered pointed to that confusion, that lack of knowledge. One of the other things that we particularly talked about during this time was anticipatory capacities around our schools, particularly those who are supposed to lead, those who have that mentor. Some of them don't have the ability to forecast or to these things will happen if this happens. There's no foresight, no planning. So everyone's running around when I'm not talking just about disaster, but when we looked at the pandemic, how we suddenly shut down, how thousands of workers were let go. So it pointed to the lack of capacity. Talking about the handling of community, we have the culture of taking feedback, or using criticism. We become very happy to change and feedback. One that was quite concerning for us is the lack of the operationalization of humanitarian standards and principles. Like for example, space went into it was in the development partner, right? And the focus on results wasn't there. It was just about this is the focus, right? And one of the great things that came out of this is the community challenge. It was, I guess, saving grace. Yeah, that was the saving grace, is that communities rose to that challenge. They filled the vacuum left behind by CSOs who often work in the space but were forced to work from home because of the restrictions. And they, despite all of the challenges that they faced, they partnered with government responders. And that wasn't exactly a walk in the park, I know, because many of you who did that, you talked about the challenges of working with other counterparts, with government, with perhaps other CSO partners. So despite all of this, the funding, the way funding was given out didn't change. Yeah? Despite all of the funding, It speaks to the same organizations that were working for their innovations. Government of the way it wrote, there were inefficiencies in development effectiveness, ineffective, weak. Those people receiving 360 million, why? Well, there's drinking parties all over the neighborhood. Yeah? Development ineffectiveness. Oh, my 19-year-old daughter applied. She's a student. I support her. She applied for 360. She got it. Yeah. So in terms of all of those experiences and how those changes took place overnight, despite all of these challenges, despite all of these changes, funding never changed. So we have to ask the question one, right? And this is what brings us to why we're here. Next slide, Jane. Thank you. So we've been talking about development in effectiveness since the morning. And some of you have folders that have these booklets that we've reprinted and we've tried to avail to you to read during your spare time, but perhaps read up on all the aspects of development effectiveness to be able to understand the issue well. But I thought I might share with us a definition of development effectiveness that the European Commission defines it. Development effectiveness is about the impact of our development cooperation, right? It is a limited resource. We know that we often have to compete for it, and it needs to be spent as effectively as possible in order to achieve the best, the fastest, most sustainable impact for those most in need. Yeah? This is why we have to scrutinize how we are doing our interventions. Better policies in developing countries coupled with effective development cooperation ensures that aid will be more effective in reducing poverty and achieving sustainable development. This is the European Commission's definition of development effectiveness. You can see that the words that stand out so it really looks at the impact, not the way, impact of our development cooperation. So that being said, how, we often ask, how did the development world take on this challenge? And I think Siale might have covered with you the journey from Paris, the many different meetings that our global leaders went to be able to forge, perhaps a pathway within which they could achieve development effectiveness. And I think the most significant one for us as civil society organization, as Siale reminded us this morning, is from Busan, the fourth high-level forum on EDC. Ties all stakeholders. For us as civil society organizations, we took on the challenge through the Istanbul Principles, and those are the 8 areas within which we determined were important to us to follow in order to foster development effectiveness. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of the principles, and in your documents you will see copies of this in detail. But when we talk about the Busan Partnership, And the shared principles, there are 4, and you can see it there: ownership of development priorities, focus on results, inclusive development partnerships, transparency and accountability to each other. Of course, the 8 Istanbul principles that are there. Right? Clear? Those are the 2 things, 2 principles. Next one. And often I get asked, why is it that the Fiji Council of Social Services so concerned about development effectiveness? Don't you look after social services? Right? And I often get asked that in a lot of spaces. This is why it's a big deal for EFCOS. Our constitution actually says that it is our mission to advocate for just and inclusive development, to strengthen the non-government and civil society sector, to build quality partnerships across sectors, to improve the resilience and well-being of our communities. Yeah? And then it goes further, and that I just want to acknowledge that as we were putting together the constitution, it was in fact when Bolambol was sitting there, made sure that we inculcated that in our mission, right? And then we, in our strategic plan, under strategic focus area 2, there is a special emphasis on development. But it is our obligation as an organization that represents civil society at these policy platforms to be talking with development effectiveness principles, leading or influencing how we're doing inputs at the national level. For example, oftentimes we get reminded that our role, we are reminded by government, that our role under the National Humanitarian Policy is to ensure that there is better coordination of civil society in humanitarian action. And that's quite difficult when you have a diverse civil society sector as we have in Fiji. We have, what many would consider on our side conservative NGOs like ours, and then there's the middle, group, and then there's perhaps the right wing. But we are all civil society actors trying to work for the good of people. But our role in particular requires us to be able to advocate effectively for civil society. So there are complications when we have a diverse CSO sector. So we've responded to this challenge by looking at standards that actually operationalize the principles of effectiveness. So we've done work around a code of accountability. That's all we've asked members who have signed on or joined EFCOS to take on or to ensure that they embed into their institutional practices, organizational practices. As a code of accountability, we have a CSO protocol and directory, where we ask our B courses or ask members at the subnational level to recognize systems or local systems to ensure there is better coordination during times of humanitarian response. We even tried to propose a conduct those who work in this sector, in the humanitarian arena, I guess. And that's still proposed because there isn't any consensus. There is that perhaps we have yet to build consensus on that. There is resistance to work together in that sense. For many of you participate, contribute to this by doing community observations reports. The localization research is done with Piango and Heg, and now we have a draft frame. Diagnostic tool. These are many of the ways in which we have tried to operationalize development effectiveness principles and also trying to ensure that people are participating in the public finance management space. They're providing that needed oversight. And civil society, creating space for civil society and advocating for civil society to participate in national and regional policy discourse. This is some of the ways in which FCOS has tried to operationalize the principles of development effectiveness. Please don't be scared with this. This is just a depiction of how FCOS has tried to bring these pieces of work together as part of development effectiveness. We've got a framework. It's made up of 4 very important components. We do people's research tools. We've got a project, an aspect on project-based surveys, the CSO standards for effectiveness, and I've explained a little bit about that. And of course, the evidence-based policy advocacy, which we've tried to do through engaging with government or through engaging with regional bodies. And, for many, when you present a framework like this, it can seem almost frightening because it seems like a new thing. But one of the things that we have had to explain is that we're already doing this. And many of those who are sitting in this room have already participated in these activities and are involved already in this framework. And this is the way we've done it. If you look particularly at the Istanbul principles, it's connected to the Code of Accountability Assessment, the localization framework. Aspects of the Grand Bargain Agreement is also inbuilt into the observatorial framework. And when people ask about how all of this relates to national systems, which is a core component of the Busan principles, you can see that some of this work we try and connect that to the National Development Plan or the upcoming Pacific 2050 strategy, which Siale and a number of regional CSOs have been involved in influencing. Or in the SDGs, if you recall, we tried in 2019 to map how civil society are contributing to the 17 goals. We've done this and taken this to New York. And so all of those connections are being done, and a lot of you are involved in this already. I wanted to zoom in a little bit on the code as an example of the contextualized tool for effectiveness, and how we are trying to operationalize the Istanbul principles in particular. And this is a code that was initially endorsed by FCOS members in 2018. It sets out approaches for institutionalizing accountability and transparency in the internal processes and the operations of the Fiji Council of Social Services. And if you look at it, it's just, it's made up of 4 components: accountability basics, accountable governance, accountable programs, accountable resource management. And you should be able to find a copy in that binded booklet. Right, having given you that, I just want to reassure you that many people, when we present frameworks, when we talk about development effectiveness, they start panicking, and I'm trying to assure you that you shouldn't, because we already from one of our partners under the CPDE, Development or CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness, a Canadian Council of International Cooperation, who said, hey, guess what? Another equivalent what this is, we are already doing it. Okay? This is nothing new. And I show pictures of photos from various activities, at least from the FCOS's perspective, community, civil society reps in discussions, talking about what they would like to see in the budget, which was done last year. I think this was our budget consultation in Samusaro. And this was in 2020. And what they did afterwards was to compile a divisional submission, and they presented this to the provincial administrator in the Cambodian. And this was done throughout all of the divisions. Yeah? And many of you were there too, in the Western Division, where the commissioner had joined us, in the Central, the commissioner and the divisional planning officer for Eastern was present to receive divisional submissions. You can see a photo of civil society reps, as well as government, who sat on a panel and answered questions on access to information. So we are actually already doing it, this work around development effectiveness, holding government and ourselves to account, yeah, for the work that we're doing and the funds that we receive. So now I'm going to ask you, now that I've shown you a little bit of what EFCOS has done with regards to development effectiveness, I'm going to ask you to, and before we get into this, has anyone got questions? Many of you are already seeing this for the second time or third time, depending on what day you joined us. I just want to give some time for anyone who has questions. Can we proceed? Have we left anyone in line? Because I can sit out for looking very junior. No questions on the framework, on the code, or any of the work that was done? No? Okay, good. All right, so my favorite part of the program, because you didn't have lunch for free, you were actually working to do this, you were getting paid to be able to go into group discussions. There are only 3 questions, if there's any conservation. Question, Mel?
On the framework, after
Yes, we'll have to go through the notes afterwards to look at. There were just so you know, those of you who weren't able to join us earlier, we had proposed that framework, and then there were suggestions to change the framework. The components largely remain the same. It's just the way that it's structured right now. There were, I guess, suggestions to change, perhaps not have evidence-based policy advocacy move up, or to have CSO effectiveness standards to move to another part. So those are some of the suggestions that have come from the 2 days of discussions. We'd allowed for people to go into groups and to talk about whether the framework as it was shaped would work for people at different levels. And we had presentations from 4 groups with 4 different suggestions on how to reorganize the framework. We will revisit that. We will see what are perhaps the most dominant suggestion, or what worked for many. And we'll try and finalize that in a report. But it might take some time for us to relook at how, and also depending on how this conversation turns out, it will also have an impact on the framework as it is. So in other words, the framework that you are seeing is, it's open for discussion, even, for those of you who weren't in the first 2 days and think that there must be a change, please feel free to suggest otherwise. If you can just go back to that slide so that I can show those. Yes. Yeah, so there were suggestions to change, so move up, evidence-based. There was even a suggestion to have CSO standards for effectiveness in the middle and everything else connected to it. Some felt that the people's research tools should be, should remain at the top. Those were some of the suggestions. So it's open to discussion. But really a depiction of the bigger picture, because many times we are contributing to bits and pieces and we're not understanding or we're not sure how this is being pulled together. Yeah, for the overall framework. Questions? I think I've overfund the people from the deep courses on this. I think they are pretty sure about where they want to go with this. We should open it up in case the others will feel that no. Colleagues from outside, you're okay that we move on? Okay, let's go to the discussion. All right. I was going to invite you to share with us, or share back into the plenary, some of the ways in which you think that, relating particularly to your experiences during the COVID-19, and of course the disaster responses. And this is not only related to those who work directly in response, but those who were working and were affected by these two major events. If you were working in a CSO and your work got disrupted because of this, how did you try to, or what are the challenges that you encountered, and what would you? So three questions. And the three questions are around new lessons learned from your responses to the humanitarian events that relate to Busan and Istanbul principles. So just a very general discussion about, now that you know the principles, the 5 I's. What is it? Information, information, identity, inquiry, involvement, investment. Okay, so this is applying the 5 I's here. Now we're going to ask those questions, but in fully, because I know you are fully fed, and if I give you 5 questions, you tell me to end it. Yes. So 3 questions. Number 1 is that. Number 2, where are the most persistent gaps? Because we had the AG come this morning and talk about some of the reports that we often share. Children selling food, families, scrap metal, or whatever you call that, scrap metal. These are the realities, and these are the gaps, and they are persistently there. Like, I no longer have to receive reports from because I go to the supermarket and 3 kids meet me as I'm walking to the door, selling roti. They are no longer in the past where, where we often had to hide that our children were there. No, the children are out there, right in our faces. So those are the symptoms. I want to know what you think are the persistent gaps, and what should be done to close those gaps. I mean, these principles, they're great. They're great principles. But you have an understanding of the issues that some are looking at national level. Some of us have an understanding of the issues, like the AG attempted to do this morning, is to come and show us that because of this demand supplies problem at the international level or the global level, because of the Ukraine crisis, we're going to continue to face this. So he was indirectly saying to us, we have to prepare. This thing is going to persist. So he's done his job, I've done my job, now you have to do your job. Yes? All right, so 3 questions. I thought maybe you can see it in divisions, because some of this is very geographically specific. Maybe we can do divisions. Yeah, you're looking at people from your same division, but tonight we'll be looking at other places, so don't worry. Okay, Mrs. Kumar, yeah? So when can we have the Western?
Yes.
Western? Can we have the Western? Or Western? Sorry, Mrs. Kumar, you put up your hand too late. Western here? Central where our city is? Northern? Please don't forget the Northern. No, stay here, please. The Nationals, yeah? The Nationals, please. Eastern, you can see that side. Please. Yeah? All right. 3 questions. Yeah? The reason why I'm asking is this. Tomorrow we're going to meet stakeholders, yeah, that might come from other places. So we're going to tell them about this. I can. Hey, no socializing, Northern, Eastern. National, go to Lori and Auntie Michaels. National, you come from a national.
Yeah, you want me to wait? If you want. Make it to see. You're like Saudi Arabia. Somebody's in here. You make that. National question. There comes the national.
May tinggi ke.
Yes, it's trying to show us there. See? Yeah. So
Is it showing?
yeah, it's showing here.
You already responded.
Accountability basis.
You already responded. So what do you think that Dilip Guzar and how can we apply?
Yeah, I would say
What new lessons did you learn from your First, what are some of the new lessons you have learned? I know that personal experience.
Example of false promises. Go to the last sheet.
Assistant gift.
They have their own it's not a human European community, so we have our surveys during the data made our easier, collaboration. So that's it. They were well aware of how the system works. They know that the things are coming from conditions where it evaluation.